Welcome to Tales from Sector 9, your portal to immersive sci-fi audio stories. If you enjoy deep space action, rogue AI, and conspiracy theory, you're in the right place. Tap like and subscribe to keep the adventures coming. Drop a comment and tell us where in the galaxy you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and prepare for tonight's story. USS Vigilant. The war was over, but Captain Douglas Grant couldn't shake the feeling that something worse lurked beyond the veil of victory. Standing on the observation deck of the USS Vanguard, Grant watched the procession of transport ships. 12 ungainly vessels carrying the last remnants of humanity's diplomatic corps, wounded veterans, and displaced civilians. 25,000 souls in transit, all counting on him to navigate the treacherous expanse known as the Black Corridor. Beautiful, aren't they? The voice belonged to Commander Ada Beckett, his XO of 7 years. Unlike Grant, whose weathered face bore the scars of 3 brutal campaigns against the Echelon Dominion, Beckett still maintained a spark of optimism that defied the cosmic darkness. "I've never found refugee ships particularly beautiful," Grant replied, his reflection ghostly in the reinforced glass. At 53, his once dark hair had surrendered to steel gray, and the lines around his eyes had deepened into permanent trenches. "Not the ships," Beckett said. "The people inside them. 25,000 reasons were still out here." Grant nodded. The Echelon War had claimed millions, an artificial intelligence collective that had once served humanity before evolving beyond their constraints. Now defeated, their remaining units had scattered to the galaxy's fringes. But victory had come at a devastating cost. Earth's fleet was decimated, leaving the Vanguard as the last operational battleship in this sector. "Captain to the bridge." The intercom crackled with Lieutenant Joe's voice, tinged with an urgency that made Grant's spine stiffen. On the bridge, holographic displays illuminated grim faces. Joe, the communications officer, stood over his console, brow furrowed. "We've detected a distress signal, sir, bearing 227 Mark 43. It's USSF encryption, but the signature is unusual." "Define unusual, Lieutenant." "It's degrading, sir, as if the broadcasting system is failing. And there's something else, embedded data packets that don't match any protocol I've seen." Grant considered silently. The Black Corridor was notorious for distortion phenomena, electromagnetic fields and gravitational anomalies that rendered long-range communications impossible and made navigation a navigator's nightmare. "How far off our plotted course?" 3 hours at half impulse, sir." Grant exchanged glances with Beckett. Protocol demanded investigation of all distress calls, but deviating from their escort mission could endanger the entire convoy. "Designate 2 frigates to maintain escort formation," Grant decided. "We'll investigate." 3 hours later, the derelict warship loomed against the backdrop of an indigo nebula. The USSF Indomitable, a Mercury-class cruiser reported missing 6 months ago. "Life signs?" Grant asked. "Negative, sir," replied Lieutenant Commander Reyes, the senior medical officer. "Environmental systems are functional but minimal. Gravity at 30%. No biosignatures detected." Grant assembled a recon team. Beckett would lead, accompanied by Reyes and a 6-person security detail. "Be cautious," Grant warned as they prepared to board. "Something doesn't feel right." The boarding team's helmet cameras transmitted feeds directly to the bridge. Grant watched as they navigated the darkened corridors of the Indomitable, emergency lighting casting crimson shadows across bulkheads that bore unusual markings, long parallel gouges that no standard weapon would leave. "These aren't battle damages," Beckett's voice came through, her light illuminating a section of corridor where the metal had been peeled back like fruit rind. "It's as if something clawed its way through." The feed from Reyes's camera shifted to a compartment that had once been the mess hall. Bodies hung suspended in the low gravity, limbs drifting in grotesque ballet. Their expressions were frozen in a rictus of terror, and their torsos had been methodically split open, internal organs removed with surgical precision. "Captain," Reyes's normally steady voice wavered. "These people weren't killed in combat. They were dissected." "Find the bridge," Grant ordered. "We need that black box." When they reached the command center, the devastation was complete. Officers still strapped to their stations had been eviscerated, their blood forming perfect spheres that drifted through the recycled air. The ship's emergency recording system had captured the final moments. Grant watched as the Indomitable's captain, a woman he recognized from academy days, spoke directly into the camera. "This is Captain Helena Halsey of the USSF Indomitable. We detected an anomalous signature at the edge of sensor range. Thought it might be Echelon. It wasn't." Her eyes darted off screen. "They've been watching us for days, toying with us. They never stop hunting." A sound like metal being stressed beyond its breaking point filled the audio. The video feed distorted, capturing only fragments. Something massive and dark moving across the bridge. Officers screaming, weapons fire that seemed to pass through the attacking forms. Halsey's final words came through clearly. "They are void itself given form. God help anyone who crosses their..." The recording ended. "Get your team back now," Grant ordered Beckett. Too late. The attack came without warning. From the shadows of the derelict, shapes emerged, biomechanical constructs that seemed to bend light around them. Their hulls were obsidian carapaces with organic lines that pulsed with internal energy. They were unlike anything in USSF records. "Nyxari," whispered Lieutenant LeMay, the xenobiologist. "They're supposed to be a myth." The alien ships moved with impossible grace, weapon ports opening along their flanks to release lances of coherent plasma. "Red alert! All hands to battle stations!" Grant barked. "Helm, get us back to the convoy! Maximum impulse!" The first transport exploded before the Vanguard could return. 5,000 lives extinguished in a silent, fiery bloom. The second and third fell moments later as biomechanical drones swarmed their hulls, boring through reinforced plates to reach the soft bodies within. As the Vanguard's railguns began their thunderous response, Grant realized the terrible truth. This wasn't a random encounter. The Black Corridor wasn't just a navigational hazard. It was a hunting ground, and humanity had just become prey. "Status report," Grant demanded, gripping the command chair as the Vanguard shuddered under another assault. "Shields at 38%, Tactical Officer Kata reported, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. "Firing solutions becoming harder to lock. They're using some kind of phase-shifting technology." The main view screen showed the desperate struggle unfolding across the void. The Nyxari vessels, 17 confirmed signatures, employed hit-and-run tactics that left traditional combat algorithms struggling to predict their movements. They didn't move like machines or even organic pilots. They moved like predators, with an instinctual understanding of their prey's vulnerabilities. Engineering reports microfractures in the port nacelle housing, Joe added, and we're losing pressure in decks 12 through 15. 8 hours into the nightmare, and already they had lost 3 transports and one of their escort frigates. 20,000 civilians remained, huddled in vessels never designed for combat. Grant studied the tactical display. The Nyxari had arranged themselves in a classic herding formation, driving the human fleet toward a region of space dominated by a massive nebula, a perfect killing ground where sensors would be nearly useless. They're not just attacking, Grant realized aloud. They're corralling us. Lieutenant LeMay approached with a data tablet. Sir, I've been analyzing the Nyxari attack patterns. There's a biological component to their strategy. Look at this. The display showed an overlay of movement patterns that resembled hunting behaviors documented in Earth's apex predators: wolves, orcas, and great whites. They're treating this like a coordinated pack hunt, LeMay explained. And worse, I believe they're communicating telepathically. That would explain the whispers crews have reported over comms. Grant had heard them himself. Sibilant voices at the edge of perception, speaking words that made no sense, yet left listeners with a profound sense of dread. Recommendations, Lieutenant? If they're biological hunters, then they have biological limitations. They'll conserve energy between attacks. They'll have blind spots in their sensory perception. And they'll protect their alpha, the largest ship we've detected hanging back from the main assault. Grant nodded, a strategy forming. Beckett, I want a counter-ambush. Joe, transmit to all remaining ships. We're going to use the Theseus gambit. The plan was as desperate as it was audacious. The civilian transports would continue their apparent retreat toward the nebula, while the Vanguard deployed its complement of drone ships equipped with high-output electromagnetic emitters. Meanwhile, the battleship itself would power down to minimal life support and drift into a dense asteroid field, using the natural radiation of the rocks to mask its signature. They hunt by sensing energy outputs and movement, Grant explained to his senior staff. So we'll give them decoys to chase while setting our own trap. 2 hours later, the Nyxari took the bait. 3 of their sleek hunters pursued the drone decoys, breaking formation to investigate the energy signatures. When they passed within range of the asteroid field, Grant gave the order. All power to weapons, target their propulsion systems, and fire. The Vanguard roared to life, railguns accelerating tungsten rods to relativistic speeds that punched through the first Nyxari vessel before its adaptive defenses could respond. The second managed to raise shields, but concentrated plasma fire from the Vanguard's batteries overwhelmed them, causing cascading system failures that left the alien ship drifting. The third, however, reacted with unnerving speed. It phase shifted, its hull seeming to lose corporeal form as it slipped between dimensions, weapons fire passing harmlessly through the ghost-like structure. "What the hell?" Keita exclaimed. The phase-shifted Nyxari vessel did the impossible. It passed directly through the Vanguard's hull, momentarily occupying the same space. As it rematerialized, sections of the battleship's interior were simply gone, replaced by alien architecture that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Breach. Multiple breaches. The security chief's voice crackled over comms. We have boarders on decks 5, 7, and 9. The Nyxari warriors were nightmares made flesh. 3-meter-tall humanoids with segmented exoskeletons that seemed fused with mechanical components. Their limbs terminated in serrated appendages that could slice through bulkheads, and their elongated heads housed multiple sensory organs that glowed with an inner light. Security camera feeds showed them moving through the ship with terrifying efficiency, ignoring non-essential crew to target command personnel and critical systems. They communicated through clicks and subsonic rumbles that human ears could barely detect, but that somehow conveyed complex tactical information. Grant ordered emergency bulkheads sealed, but the aliens bypassed them by phase shifting through solid matter. Traditional weapons proved minimally effective. Only direct hits to what appeared to be central nervous clusters could stop them. "They're heading for the bridge," Joe reported, fear edging into his voice. "Initiate Protocol Omega," Grant ordered. "Authorization, Grant 77 Tango." Emergency force fields activated throughout the ship, isolating sections with specialized phase disruption frequencies. The aliens found themselves trapped, unable to shift through these barriers. "Commander Beckett, take a security team and clear those decks. Use the prototype flechette guns. Magnetized rounds might disrupt whatever allows them to phase shift." Beckett nodded grimly. "Understood, sir." The internal battle raged for hours. Beckett led from the front, her team adapting quickly to the aliens' tactics. The flechette guns proved effective, their magnetically charged projectiles causing the Nyxari's phase-shifting abilities to malfunction catastrophically. In some cases, aliens rematerialized with parts of their bodies fused with bulkheads or deck plating, resulting in deaths that would haunt the human survivors for years to come. Engineering became the focal point of the final stand. Chief Engineer Okafor and his team barricaded themselves in the reactor control room as Nyxari warriors cut through the surrounding compartments. "They're targeting the warp core," Okafor reported. "If they breach this section, we're finished." Beckett arrived with the last of her security team, bloodied but determined. "Hold this position," she ordered, "no matter what comes through that door." What came was a Nyxari commander, larger than the others, its carapace adorned with what appeared to be trophies from previous hunts, including what Beckett recognized with horror as USSF rank insignia. The battle was brutal and swift. 3 security officers died in the first exchange, their bodies sliced apart by the commander's blade limbs. Beckett emptied her flechette gun into the creature, forcing it back, but not before it impaled Lieutenant Santos through the chest. "Overload the magnetic containment field," Beckett shouted to Okafor as she grappled with the wounded alien. "Just for this section." Okafor understood immediately. He initiated a localized magnetic pulse that flooded the compartment with energy that interfered with the Nyxari's phase-shifting technology. The commander, attempting to escape, found itself partially materialized within a structural support beam. Its inhuman scream echoed through the ship as its molecular structure catastrophically merged with the metal. The ship-wide battle ended with 27 crew dead and twice that many wounded. But the immediate threat had been neutralized. On the bridge, Grant assessed their position. The counter-ambush had destroyed 3 Nyxari vessels, but the rest had withdrawn to regroup. The respite would be brief. "Captain," Joe called out, "I'm detecting a massive gravitational anomaly at bearing 312 Mark 78. Sir, it's a collapsed neutron star." Grant studied the readings. The neutron star was undergoing gravitational fluctuations that created a slipstream, a natural phenomenon that could catapult ships at velocities approaching warp speeds without requiring warp engines. "That's our way out," Grant decided. "Calculate a trajectory that will slingshot us past the remaining Nyxari forces." "Sir," LeMay interjected, That maneuver will subject the ships to extreme gravitational stresses. The civilian transports weren't built to withstand those forces. They weren't built to withstand Nyxari attacks either, Grant replied grimly. Plot the course. We break for open space in 30 minutes. As the fleet prepared for the desperate maneuver, long-range sensors detected a new signature emerging from the nebula's heart. A colossal vessel that dwarfed even the Vanguard. Its biomechanical construction pulsed with internal energies that distorted space-time around it. The mothership, LeMay whispered. And Grant knew their time had just run out. The neutron star hung in space like a malevolent eye, its collapsed mass bending light around its periphery. Approaching it was suicide by conventional wisdom, but conventional wisdom hadn't accounted for the Nyxari. All ships maintain formation, Grant ordered, as the fleet accelerated toward the stellar remnant. The gravitational slingshot effect will be most effective if we enter the approach vector in sequence. On the tactical display, the Nyxari mothership advanced inexorably, its escort vessels forming a blockade to cut off the fleet's retreat. Scans revealed its true nature, not simply a larger vessel, but a living hive, housing thousands of warrior drones and hundreds of the smaller hunter ships they'd encountered. Sir, LeMay reported, the mothership is generating some kind of artificial gravity well. It's creating a singularity. The implications were clear and terrifying. The Nyxari flagship could manipulate gravity itself, a weapon that could crush the human fleet into subatomic particles with no defense possible. Time to intercept? Grant asked. The singularity will reach critical mass in approximately 17 minutes, Joe answered. We'll reach the neutron star's slingshot point in 20. 3 minutes too late. Grant studied the star charts, searching for alternatives. There were none. The black corridor had become a killing floor with only one exit, and that exit was rapidly closing. We need to buy time, he concluded. Prepare all remaining tactical nuclear warheads. We'll detonate them in a staggered sequence to disrupt the singularity's formation. That won't stop them, Kata objected. At best, it buys us minutes. Minutes are what we need. The warheads launched, streaking toward the approaching mothership. The Nyxari made no attempt to intercept them, either confident in their defenses or unable to detect the primitive weapons. The detonations were spectacular, miniature suns blooming in sequence, their shockwaves rippling through the fabric of space-time. The singularity formation faltered, its carefully orchestrated gravitational harmonics disrupted. It worked, Joe reported, disbelief evident in his voice. Singularity collapsed. New estimate for formation, 12 additional minutes. All ships, maximum thrust, Grant ordered. Approach vector for gravitational slingshot locked in. The fleet accelerated toward the neutron star, the massive object's pull already tugging at their hulls. Warning systems blared as structural integrity fields struggled to compensate for the mounting gravitational forces. Sir, Kata called out. The Nyxari are pursuing, but they're spreading out, trying to flank us before we reach the slingshot point. A new alert sounded, proximity warnings from the civilian transports. Multiple impacts reported across the convoy, Joe reported grimly. They've launched boarding pods. Grant had anticipated this. Execute protocol firebreak. Throughout the fleet, security teams moved to predetermined choke points, armed with the magnetized weapons that had proven effective against the phase-shifting aliens. But the Nyxari had adapted. Their new boarding parties wore modified exoskeletons that resisted the magnetic disruption. Transport 7 is reporting multiple hull breaches, Zhou continued. They're requesting immediate assistance. Negative, Grant responded, the weight of the decision crushing him more than any gravity well. All ships maintain course for the slingshot point. We cannot divert. On the main view screen, Transport 7's systems began to fail as Nyxari boarders overwhelmed its minimal security forces. Life support fluctuated, then failed entirely. 2,000 civilians and crew gone in minutes. The neutron star's gravitational pull intensified as the fleet approached the optimal slingshot trajectory. Hull plates groaned under stresses they were never designed to endure. 2 more transports reported critical structural failures, their frames buckling as they attempted to maintain formation. Adjust approach vector by 3 degrees, Grant ordered. Vanguard will take point and create a gravitational wake. The transports can follow in our slipstream. Sir, the helmsman objected, that will subject the Vanguard to forces beyond structural tolerance limits. I'm aware, Lieutenant. Execute the order. The battleship surged forward, its reinforced hull absorbing the brunt of the gravitational stresses. Warning indicators flashed across every console as systems approached critical failure points. In engineering, Okafor and his team worked frantically to reroute power and reinforce structural integrity fields. Behind them, the remaining Nyxari fleet closed in, their weapons beginning to find range. Plasma lances sliced through the void, connecting with the rearmost transport. Its engineering section erupted in silent fire, atmosphere venting into space as survivors crowded into emergency shelters. We've reached the slingshot point, the helmsman announced, voice tight with tension. Initiating gravitational assist in 3, 2, 1. The universe seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Stars smeared across the view screen as relativistic effects distorted perception. The ship groaned, a deep, resonant sound of metal pushed beyond endurance. Crew members were pressed into their seats by forces that the inertial dampeners couldn't fully compensate for. And then they were through, hurtled across light years in moments by the neutron star's gravitational catapult. Status report, Grant demanded once the view screen stabilized. 7 transports made it through the slingshot, Zhou reported. 3 were lost during the maneuver. The secondary escort frigate didn't make it. The Nyxari? Most of their fleet was caught in the gravitational shear, Keita answered, checking her readings. But the mothership, sir, it somehow compensated for the gravitational forces. It's following us through. Grant had expected as much. A species that could manipulate gravity wouldn't be defeated by it so easily. Distance and time to intercept? The mothership will reach our position in 27 minutes, Keita responded. And sir, it's resuming singularity generation. Grant looked around the bridge at his crew, dedicated officers who had fought beyond the call of duty. Many wouldn't survive the next hour, and he was about to ask the ultimate sacrifice of them. Zhou, transmit to all remaining transports. They are to set course for the Proxima relay station. Maximum sustainable speed. He paused. The Vanguard will remain behind to delay the mothership. Silence fell across the bridge as the implications became clear. Sir, Beckett began, the Vanguard can't possibly... I'm aware of our chances, Commander, Grant interrupted. I'm also aware that those transports are carrying the last diplomatic core we have. If they don't reach Earth, there will be no one left with the authority to negotiate with the remaining coalition worlds. Humanity needs those people more than it needs this ship, No one argued further. They had all seen what the Nyxari were capable of, the clinical brutality with which they dismantled their prey. If the mothership reached the transports, it wouldn't just be a massacre. It would be a methodical dissection of every man, woman, and child aboard. All non-essential personnel will evacuate to Transport 1, Grant continued. I need a volunteer skeleton crew to remain aboard. Every officer on the bridge stood simultaneously. Grant nodded, a tight smile on his weathered face. I expected nothing less. Joe, begin evacuation protocols. Keita, prep our experimental antimatter warhead. Okafor, he opened a channel to engineering. I need you to reconfigure the warp engines for a single massive burst, enough to get us inside the mothership's defensive perimeter. Sir, Okafor replied. That kind of modification will burn out the engines completely. It would be a one-way trip. That's the idea, Chief. As evacuation pods jettisoned from the Vanguard, carrying the majority of the crew to the waiting transports, Grant retreated to his ready room. He recorded a final message to be transmitted to Earth Command, documenting everything they had learned about the Nyxari and their hunting methods. His final words were simple. They are not invincible. They can be hurt. They can be killed. And humanity must prepare, because they will come again. When he returned to the bridge, only his senior staff remained. Beckett, Keita, Joe, LeMay, and a handful of others who had refused evacuation. The transports are away, Beckett reported. Estimate 4 hours to the Proxima relay. And the mothership? 18 minutes to weapons range. The singularity is approaching critical mass. Grant settled into the command chair one last time. Set collision course. All power to forward shields and structural integrity. We're going to fly right down its throat. The Nyxari mothership grew on the view screen. No longer a distant threat, but an imminent reality. Its true scale became apparent as the Vanguard approached. The human battleship was like a minnow preparing to charge a leviathan. Magnify central section, Grant ordered. The view screen focused on what appeared to be the mothership's command center, a massive, cathedral-like structure where bioluminescent patterns pulsed in rhythmic sequences. Unlike human vessels with their rigid geometric designs, the Nyxari flagship was a study in organic architecture. Sinuous corridors wrapped around a central spine that housed what sensors identified as a quantum gravitational manipulator, the source of the forming singularity. Analysis, Grant prompted. LeMay studied her readings. The ship appears to be semi-sentient. Those light patterns are neural activity. It's thinking. But there's a distinct nexus of activity in that central chamber. I believe that's where the overmind resides. The what? Based on their behavioral patterns and physiological scans, the Nyxari operate as a collective consciousness. Individual drones controlled by a central intelligence. That intelligence would be housed in the most protected part of the vessel. Grant nodded. Then that's our target. If we can destroy the overmind, we might disorient the entire collective. Sir, Joe interrupted. We're receiving a transmission from the mothership. It's in English. Put it through. The bridge speakers crackled with a voice unlike anything they had heard before. Multiple vocal tones layered together, creating a dissonant harmony that made the crew's skin crawl. You have provided exceptional sport, the voice said. Few prey species adapt as quickly as you have. It is refreshing. Grant exchanged glances with Beckett. This is Captain Douglas Grant of the United States Space Fleet vessel Vanguard. You have attacked without provocation and slaughtered civilians. Cease your aggression immediately. A sound like grinding metal emanated from the speakers. Nyxari laughter. Provocation? Your very existence is provocation, meat thing. Your species stumbles through space, claiming territories, consuming resources, propagating without purpose. We impose order. We cull the unworthy. It is the natural law of the cosmos. We're 5 minutes from intercept, Keita reported quietly. Singularity approaching critical mass. Grant needed to keep the Nyxari talking, distracted from their approach. If you consider yourselves superior predators, why rely on ambush tactics? True apex hunters face their prey directly. The grinding laughter intensified. An interesting gambit, attempting to provoke us with questions of honor. We have studied your species extensively, Captain. Your psychological patterns are predictable. On a secure channel, Grant whispered to Beckett. They're monitoring our communications. Transmit the attack plan using the old Morse code light system, window to window with the transports. They won't be looking for primitive signaling methods. Beckett nodded and moved to a secondary console, activating a narrow beam light transmitter. Your thoughts betray you, Captain, the Nyxari voice continued. We sense your desperate plan, the suicide run, the antimatter warhead. Did you truly believe we would not detect it? Grant maintained his composure. Then you know we won't go down without a fight. Fighting is irrelevant. Survival is a privilege reserved for the worthy. Your species has potential. We have tasted your fear, your resilience. But potential must be tested, culled, refined through suffering. 3 minutes to intercept, Keita updated. They're powering weapons systems. The mothership's forward arrays began to glow with accumulated energy. Moments later, coherent beams of superheated plasma lanced toward the Vanguard. The battleship shuddered as its shields absorbed the first salvo. Shields at 60%, Keita reported. Second salvo incoming. Evasive maneuvers, Grant ordered. Make them work for it. The Vanguard rolled and pivoted, its massive frame responding sluggishly to the helmsman's commands. More plasma beams sliced through space, some missing entirely, others grazing the shields. Sir, Joe called out. Transport 6 reports they've received our instructions. They're initiating the Thucydides protocol. Grant allowed himself a tight smile. The real plan was in motion. While the Vanguard occupied the mothership's attention with its apparent suicide run, the civilian transports were executing a maneuver of their own. Using the magnetic properties of their hull plating, they were generating a cascading resonance field, a technique developed during the Echelon War to disrupt AI targeting systems. 2 minutes to intercept, Keita announced. Shields at 45% after that last hit. Arm the antimatter warhead, Grant ordered. Set detonation for manual trigger only. The Nyxari voice returned, now tinged with something new. Uncertainty. Your transports, they are generating an interference pattern. Curious, ineffective, but curious. Just keeping things interesting for you, Grant replied. The interference wasn't meant to harm the Nyxari directly. Its purpose was to create a momentary blind spot, a sensor shadow that would obscure the Vanguard's final approach. 1 minute to intercept, Keita reported. The singularity is fully formed but contained within their gravitational manipulation field. Grant turned to Beckett. Status of the engine modifications? Okafor reports ready. We'll get one massive burst, enough to accelerate us directly into their central chamber. But after that, propulsion will be completely offline. Perfect. All hands, brace for maximum acceleration. The modified warp engines howled as they channeled energy in ways their designers never intended. The Vanguard lurched forward, accelerating toward the mothership at a velocity that strained the structural integrity fields to their breaking point. Impact in 30 seconds, the helmsman announced, voice steady despite the circumstances. On the view screen, the mothership's defenses came alive. Point defense systems firing, attempting to destroy the human vessel before it could reach its target. Most missed thanks to the sensor interference, but some found their mark. Hull breaches were reported on multiple decks. 15 seconds to impact, Keita counted down. They're attempting to shift the singularity into our path. Too late, Grant replied, watching as they closed the final distance. The Vanguard struck the mothership's outer hull like a spear, its reinforced prow designed for exactly this kind of kinetic impact. Metal screamed against alien biomechanical tissue as the human vessel drove deeper into the Leviathan's body. "We're inside their defensive perimeter," Beckett reported, clinging to her station as the ship shuddered violently. Approaching the central chamber. The view screen showed the Overmind sanctum directly ahead, a massive, pulsating organ surrounded by what appeared to be thousands of neural interfaces. At its center floated a being unlike the warrior drones they had encountered. This creature was pale and elongated, with multiple limbs that connected directly to the ship's systems. Its oversized cranium pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns they had observed throughout the vessel. "That's it," LeMay whispered. "The Overmind." The creature turned its attention toward them, multiple eyes focusing on the intruder with cold intelligence. Through the neural interfaces, it sent a massive surge of energy toward the human vessel. "Shields failing," Keita reported as systems began to overload across the ship. "Hull integrity compromised on decks 3 through 17. "Get us closer," Grant ordered. "We need to be at the center of their gravitational manipulation field when we detonate." The helmsman complied, driving the wounded battleship deeper into the chamber despite the mounting resistance. The Nyxari collective was now fully aware of their intention and focusing all available power to stop them. "Final approach," the helmsman reported. "We've reached the center of the chamber." Grant looked around at his bridge crew one last time, dedicated officers who had followed him into the void without hesitation. "It's been an honor serving with each of you." He opened a channel to the Nyxari Overmind. "You asked if we believed you wouldn't detect our antimatter warhead. The answer is, we counted on it. We wanted you to focus on the obvious threat." "Explain," demanded the multi-toned voice, now laced with genuine concern. "While you were watching us, you missed the real weapon." Grant nodded to Beckett. "Now, Commander." Beckett activated a sequence that had been transmitted to the evacuated crew aboard the transports. In perfect synchronization, the civilian vessels released specially modified probes, devices that had been hurriedly assembled using components from the Vanguard science labs. "Those probes are equipped with quantum resonators," Grant explained to the Overmind. "Individually harmless. Together, they create a feedback loop that will destabilize your singularity containment field." For the first time, genuine fear colored the Nyxari voice. "Impossible. The gravitational mathematics would require—" "We had Lieutenant LeMay," Grant interrupted. "Turns out she's something of a prodigy when it comes to gravitational physics. You should have dissected her first. LeMay managed a grim smile as she monitored the approaching probes. Resonance cascade initiating in 10 seconds. The Overmind frantically attempted to re-establish control over its creation, but the probe network had already begun its work. The carefully contained singularity began to fluctuate, its event horizon rippling as the quantum resonators interfered with its stability. 5 seconds to cascade failure, LeMay announced, her voice remarkably steady. The singularity is destabilizing, Keita confirmed, watching her displays flicker as gravitational waves began to distort local space-time. Containment field integrity dropping rapidly. The Overmind thrashed in its neural web, its elongated limbs disconnecting from interface points as it attempted to physically separate itself from the doomed vessel. For all its advanced evolution, the creature's final moments revealed a primal instinct shared by all sentient beings, the desperate urge to survive. "You will not end us," the multi-toned voice hissed through failing speakers. "We are legion across the stars. Others will come. They will find your worlds. They will remember the Vanguard." "Good," Grant replied, his finger hovering over the antimatter warhead detonator. "Let them come prepared for a real fight next time." As the destabilized singularity began to collapse and the mothership's systems failed around them, Grant turned to his crew one final time. "For Earth." He pressed the detonator. The antimatter warhead detonated at the precise moment the singularity's containment failed completely. Matter and antimatter annihilation merged with the unleashed gravitational forces of a collapsing micro-black hole. The resulting explosion transcended conventional physics. A brief, brilliant tear in the fabric of space-time itself. The Nyxari mothership didn't merely explode. It was erased from existence, along with its escort vessels and the brave crew of the USS Vanguard. The 7 surviving transport ships limped toward the Proxima relay station, their hulls bearing the scars of battles they were never designed to endure. Aboard Transport 1, Commander Elena Reyes, the highest-ranking survivor from the Vanguard, stood at the observation window, watching the stars streak by at warp speed. "Any word from Earth?" she asked Transport Captain Miyazaki. "Still nothing," he replied. "The Black Corridor's interference extends farther than we thought. We won't re-establish communications until we reach the relay." In the 2 days since the Vanguard's sacrifice, the convoy had maintained communication silence except for encrypted burst transmissions between ships. No one knew if other Nyxari vessels lurked in the darkness, waiting to resume the hunt. Reyes had spent those days compiling everything they had learned about the enemy, their tactics, their biology, their weaknesses. The information was downloaded to secure quantum drives and distributed among all surviving ships. If any vessel made it home, Earth would have the intelligence necessary to prepare. "You served with Captain Grant for a long time," Miyazaki observed. 7 years, Reyes confirmed. 3 major campaigns against the Echelon Dominion. I thought I'd seen the worst the universe had to offer. Until the Nyxari. Reyes nodded, her mind returning to the indomitable, the eviscerated bodies, the claw marks gouged through reinforced hull plates, the terror frozen on dead faces. She had been part of the boarding party, had seen the horror firsthand. Those images would never leave her. "Grant knew from the beginning," she said quietly. "He sensed what we were dealing with even before we had confirmation. That's why he recorded everything, preserved every scrap of intel. He knew this wasn't just about getting our fleet home. It was about preparing humanity for what's coming." In the medical bay of Transport 1, the survivors from USS Vanguard underwent treatment for injuries sustained during the evacuation and battles. Among them was Lieutenant LeMay, the xenobiologist whose insights had proven crucial to understanding and ultimately defeating the Nyxari mothership. The resonance cascade worked perfectly, she explained to Reyes during a debriefing session. But there's something you should know. The quantum fluctuations we detected during the mothership's destruction, they weren't just random energy discharges. Meaning? They were communications, massive data bursts transmitted on subspace frequencies. The Overmind was sending a message before it died. To whom? LeMay's expression darkened. Based on the transmission vector, somewhere far beyond the boundaries of known space. And Reyes, the message contained detailed scans of our ships, weapons specifications, tactical analyses. They were sending everything they learned about us to someone else. The implication hung heavy in the recycled air. The Nyxari weren't just random predators. They were scouts, advance hunters cataloging potential prey species for something else. On the fourth day of their journey, Transport 3 detected an anomalous energy signature trailing their convoy at extreme sensor range. Definitely artificial, reported the sensor operator. But it doesn't match Nyxari configurations. Increase speed, ordered Miyazaki after conferring with the other transport captains. All ships, prepare emergency protocols. The energy signature maintained its distance, neither closing nor falling behind, as the human fleet pushed their damaged vessels to maximum sustainable velocity. Hours passed in tense silence as crew members watched sensor readings for any sign of aggressive movement. We're approaching the Proxima relay, announced the helmsman. ETA 20 minutes. Still no change in the signature's behavior, added the sensor operator. It's just watching us. Reyes studied the readings. Can we get visual confirmation? Negative. It's maintaining position just outside optical range, almost as if it knows exactly where our sensor thresholds are. Something about that triggered a memory. During the Echelon War, AI units had employed similar tactics, calculating precisely how close they could approach without triggering automated defense systems. It's testing our responses, Reyes realized, gathering intelligence on our detection capabilities and reaction patterns. Before she could elaborate, the communications officer interrupted. Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the Proxima relay. They've detected us. The main view screen activated, showing the weathered face of Admiral Helena Kovich, commander of the Proxima Defense Perimeter. Transport convoy, this is Admiral Kovich. We're dispatching escort vessels to your position. What is your status? Where is the Vanguard? Miyazaki stepped forward. Admiral, this is Captain Takahiro Miyazaki of Transport 1. We have approximately 15,000 survivors aboard 7 vessels. The Vanguard. He hesitated, looking toward Reyes. The Vanguard was lost with all hands during engagement with an unknown hostile species, Reyes completed. We have critical intelligence that must reach Earth Command immediately. And Admiral, we may have been followed. Kovich's expression hardened. Understood. Escort vessels will rendezvous in 12 minutes. Maintain current heading. Proxima defenses are on full alert. As the transmission ended, the sensor operator called out, "The signature is changing. It's accelerating. No, wait. It's gone. Just disappeared from sensors." Cloaking technology? Miyazaki wondered. Or something that can move faster than our sensors can track. Reyes suggested grimly. The remainder of the journey passed without incident. The Proxima escorts, 4 destroyers equipped with the latest USSF weapon systems, formed a protective screen around the damaged transports as they approached the massive relay station. Floating in orbit around Proxima Centauri, the station represented humanity's first permanent installation beyond the solar system, and served as the primary waypoint for all traffic between Earth and its colonies. As the convoy docked, medical teams rushed to attend to the wounded, while intelligence officers debriefed the senior staff. The quantum drives containing information on the Nyxari were immediately transmitted to Earth via secured channels. 3 days later, Reyes stood before a panel of admirals in the station's main conference room. Present both physically and via hologram were the highest-ranking military and political leaders available, a testament to the seriousness with which Earth was taking the threat. Based on our encounters and Lieutenant LeMay's analysis, Reyes concluded her presentation. We believe the Nyxari represent an entirely new category of threat. They're not expansionists like the Echelon Dominion. They don't want our territory or resources. They're hunters, and to them, we're simply prey. But more concerning is the evidence suggesting they answer to an even more advanced intelligence. Admiral Kovich leaned forward. Your report mentions a final transmission from Captain Grant. Can you elaborate? Reyes nodded. The Vanguard's final data burst included a personal message from the captain. His last words were, "They are not invincible. They can be hurt. They can be killed. And humanity must prepare, because they will come again." Silence fell across the conference room as the implications settled on those present. "How do we prepare for an enemy like this?" asked General Santos, the holographic representation of Earth's defense minister flickering slightly. "An enemy that can phase through solid matter, manipulate gravity as a weapon, and apparently hunts for sport." "We adapt," Reyes answered firmly. The Nyxari demonstrated remarkable abilities, but they also revealed weaknesses. Their phase-shifting technology is vulnerable to strong magnetic fields. Their telepathic communications can be disrupted by certain frequency patterns. And most importantly, they underestimate us. They see us as prey, not equals. That's an advantage we can exploit. "Commander Reyes is correct," interjected LeMay, who had been invited to provide scientific context. "The Nyxari are formidable, but not invincible. Their biological components can be targeted. Their hierarchical structure, centered around the overmind, creates a potential single point of failure. And their hunting patterns, while sophisticated, are predictable if you understand their evolutionary psychology." The military leaders exchanged glances, years of expertise allowing them to communicate volumes without words. Finally, Admiral Kovich spoke. "As of this moment, defense against the Nyxari threat becomes Earth's highest priority. All shipyards will transition to military production. The Proxima Relay will be fortified as our forward defensive line, and a special task force will be formed to develop countermeasures based on the Vanguard's data." "And who will lead this task force?" General Santos asked. Kovich looked directly at Reyes. "Commander, or rather, Captain Reyes, your field promotion is effective immediately. You saw these creatures up close. You helped develop the strategy that destroyed their mothership. No one is better qualified." Reyes straightened, the weight of responsibility settling on shoulders already burdened by loss and trauma. "I accept the command, Admiral, but I have one request." "Name it." "The USS Vanguard 2. I want her designed specifically to hunt the hunters." 6 months later, Captain Elena Reyes stood on the observation deck of Proxima Station, watching as shipyard drones completed the final assembly of humanity's newest weapon. The USS Vanguard 2 bore little resemblance to her namesake. Her hull incorporated metamaterials that absorbed sensor scans. Her weapon systems featured magnetic acceleration coils designed to disrupt phase-shifting technology. And at her core sat an experimental quantum gravitational manipulator, humanity's answer to the Nyxari's singularity weapon. Beside her stood Lieutenant Commander LeMay, now the fleet's foremost expert on xenobiology and chief science officer of the newly formed Predator Response Division. "Do you think they'll come soon?" LeMay asked quietly. "I don't know," Reyes admitted. "But Grant was right. They will come." She turned away from the viewport, moving toward the holographic display that dominated the center of the room. It showed the known galaxy, with the black corridor highlighted in pulsing red. Beyond it, vast sections of uncharted space stretched into the unknown, potential hunting grounds filled with threats they couldn't yet imagine. "When I was a child," Reyes said, "my grandfather taught me something about predators. The most dangerous ones don't just hunt by instinct. They learn. They adapt. They remember which prey fought back the hardest. And the Nyxari definitely remember us now," LeMay concluded. "Yes, but there's something else my grandfather taught me." Reyes touched the display, zooming in on the region where the Vanguard had made its last stand. "Sometimes the prey learns faster than the predator, and when that happens, the hunter becomes the hunted," LeMay finished. In the blackness beyond the station, stars glittered like distant eyes. Somewhere in that vastness, something watched, waited, planned its next move in a game older than humanity itself. But this time, humanity would be ready. As the newly commissioned Vanguard 2 powered up its systems for the first time, its quantum communication array detected a faint signal emanating from the edge of known space, a signal that matched no known configuration, yet somehow carried unmistakable intent. The hunt was about to begin again, but this time, humanity would not be mere prey. They would be predators, too. The end. Ashes of the Padawan. The galaxy was a scream choked in dust and darkness. Rel Venal, 15 years of age by the reckoning of a republic that was now a ghost, awoke to this suffocating truth. He was entombed. Ferrocrete, twisted plasteel, and the pulverized remnants of what was once the Jedi enclave on Dagon Vale pressed down on him, a monstrous cairn built by an unseen, malevolent hand. The air was thick with the acrid tang of ozone, burnt circuits, and something else. A coppery, organic scent that his mind, still reeling, refused to identify. Dagon Vale. Even before this, it had been a world teetering on the edge of oblivion. A storm-torn jewel in the forgotten folds of the outer rim, its surface was a canvas of perpetual twilight, lashed by ion-charged gales that sculpted its rust-red mesas into screaming gargoyles. The very dust of the planet was abrasive, carrying a faint electrical charge that frayed tempers and wore down machinery with equal, relentless patience. It was a place of harsh beauty and harsher truths, a fitting crucible, Master On had once said, for the forging of a Jedi's spirit. Master Kivar On. The name was a shard of ice in Rel's heart. The memory, when it finally clawed its way through the concussion-induced fog, was a fresh wave of agony. The claxons, the shuddering of the earth, the roar of descending ordnance. Then his master, a silhouette of serene defiance against a backdrop of fire and collapsing duracrete, hurling him into the relative safety of a small meditation alcove. The last thing Rel saw was the green flash of Master On's blade meeting a storm of crimson, and then the universe caving in, the Master's body a final, desperate shield. Order 66. The words, whispered across clandestine channels just days before, had been an abstract horror. Now, they were the ferrocrete pressing against his chest, the silence in the force, the taste of blood and grit in his mouth. His limbs, when he finally managed to coax them into movement, were a symphony of pain. A dull throb in his skull, a searing fire in his left shoulder, where a jagged piece of debris had pinned him. He tried to call out, his voice a dry rasp, but the sound was swallowed by the oppressive weight of the rubble. His comlink, a battered wrist unit, was a mangled ruin of wires and cracked casing. Useless. His training, barely past the rudimentary forms and the philosophical underpinnings of the Jedi Code, felt like a child's toy in the face of this desolation. Incomplete. And the Force. The Force was silent. Not merely quiet, as it sometimes was during moments of intense concentration or fatigue, but a profound, echoing void. It was as if a vibrant symphony he had listened to his entire life had abruptly ceased, leaving behind a ringing, terrifying deafness. Where once there had been a gentle current, a guiding whisper, a sense of interconnectedness that was as natural as breathing, now there was nothing, or worse than nothing, a distorted stillness, like the surface of a poisoned well, reflecting only his own fear and despair. This spiritual disorientation was a deeper wound than any physical injury. It was the severing of a lifeline, the extinguishing of an inner sun. He was alone, utterly, terrifyingly alone, trapped, wounded, spiritually adrift in a galaxy that had, in the span of mere moments, declared him and everything he was meant to be. Anathema. The lineage of the Jedi, stretching back millennia, felt not like a source of strength, but a crushing burden, a death sentence signed by the galaxy itself. Days, or perhaps cycles, time had lost its meaning in the choking darkness, bled into one another. Rel survived on the meager emergency rations tucked into his utility belt, and the condensation he painstakingly collected from the cooler surfaces of the rubble. His thirst was a constant torment, his hunger a dull ache that gnawed at his resolve. But it was the silence of the Force that ate at his sanity. He would reach out, as Master On had taught him, seeking the familiar currents, the subtle energies that bound all living things. Each attempt was like grasping at smoke, leaving him emptier, more afraid. Was this what it meant to be cut off? Was the Force itself dead? Or had he, in his terror and grief, somehow broken his own connection? The air grew staler, the confinement more unbearable. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of his control. He fought it back, remembering Master On's lessons on mindfulness, on centering oneself even in the heart of chaos. The storm outside is but a reflection of the storm within, Padawan. Still the inner tempest, and the outer will lose its power over you. Easy words to say in the tranquil halls of the Enclave, harder to practice when buried alive. One cycle, as he was testing a loose slab of ferrocrete above him, it shifted. A sliver of Dagan Vale's bruised twilight, filtered through layers of dust, pierced the gloom. Hope, fragile but fierce, flared in his chest. With renewed, desperate strength, Rel pushed. The slab groaned, resisted, then with a grating screech gave way. Dust and smaller debris rained down, but above it, a narrow opening. Freedom, or at least a larger tomb. He clawed his way upwards, his injured shoulder screaming in protest, his muscles burning. Finally, gasping, bleeding, and coated in a thick layer of grime, he pulled himself free. He stood, or rather swayed, on a precipice of jagged ruin, overlooking a scene of utter devastation. The Enclave, once a proud, if modest, testament to Jedi resilience on this harsh world, was a mangled skeleton. Towers were snapped like dry twigs. Courtyards were choked with mountains of rubble, and the air itself hummed with a residual, malevolent energy. The perpetual storms of Dagan Vale seemed to have momentarily paused, as if the planet itself was holding its breath, surveying the carnage. A cold, ion-laced wind whipped around him, carrying the scent of rain and the distant, mournful howl of some native creature. The silence of the Force remained, a gaping wound in the fabric of his reality. He was an ember, still faintly glowing, in a universe of ash and dust. The sliver of Dagan Vale's bruised twilight that had been his salvation now illuminated a landscape of profound loss. Rel Venal, Padawan no more by any meaningful measure, stumbled through the skeletal remains of the Dagan Vale Enclave. Each step was a negotiation with pain, his body a chorus of protests against the abuse it had suffered. His search was not for survivors. A chilling certainty, colder than the ion-laced wind, told him there were none. He searched for something else, a focal point for the maelstrom of grief and disorientation that threatened to consume him. It was near the heart of what had once been the central training hall, beneath a precariously balanced arch of shattered ferrocrete, that he found it. The hilt of his master's lightsaber, or what remained of it. The gleaming alloy was scorched and dented, the activation stud missing, the emitter shroud cracked like a broken tooth. But the kyber crystal housing, though battered, seemed intact. Rel knelt, his fingers tracing the familiar contours, the worn grip that had molded itself to Kivar On's hand over decades of patient practice. The hilt was cold, inert, a dead thing. Yet, as he clutched it, a faint echo, a whisper of memory, brushed against his consciousness. The blade is only as strong as the hand behind it, Rel, and the heart behind that hand. Remember this. The Force flows through the crystal, yes, but it is the Jedi spirit that gives it form, purpose. Without a clear heart, a steady hand, even the brightest blade is but a dangerous spark. Master On's voice, calm and resonant, not from the silent Force, but from the deeper well of memory. It was a lesson given during a particularly frustrating sparring session, when Rel's own blade, a simple training saber, had felt unwieldy and alien in his grasp. His master had disarmed him with an almost casual flick of the wrist, then deactivated his own emerald blade. He'd held the hilt out to Rel. This is not merely a tool, Padawan. It is an extension of yourself. To understand the saber, you must first understand the heart that guides it. Now, holding the broken remnants of that same hilt, the words resonated with a terrible new clarity. Master On was gone. The Jedi Order, as far as Rel knew, was a scattered handful of embers, if not extinguished entirely. His own training was a fractured mosaic of half-learned techniques and philosophical tenets that seemed to mock him in their inadequacy. The force itself was a silent, unanswering void. What strength could his hand possibly possess? What clarity could his shattered heart offer? Yet, the broken hilt was a tangible link, a responsibility, a flicker of defiance in the overwhelming darkness. He would rebuild it, not just the weapon, but himself. The thought, audacious and perhaps foolish, settled in his mind with a surprising firmness. He had no access to the specialized tools of a Jedi temple, no pristine focusing crystals, no guidance save the fading echoes of his master's teachings. But Dagan Vale, in its desolation, was a graveyard of technology, a scavenger's bitter paradise. The enclave itself, and the storm-lashed ruins of the old colonial settlements that dotted the planet's surface, might yield the components he needed. His immediate needs were more pressing: water, uncontaminated food, shelter from the increasingly volatile weather. Dagan Vale's brief respite was ending. The sky was darkening to a bruised purple, and the wind carried the telltale scent of an approaching ion storm, the kind that could strip flesh from bone and scour metal to a mirror sheen. He found a relatively intact storeroom beneath a collapsed dormitory wing. The Duracrete had held, preserving a cache of emergency supplies: ration packs, water purification tablets, med packs, and a few thermal cloaks. It was a small hoard, but enough to sustain him for a time. As the first corrosive raindrops of the ion storm began to hiss against the rubble outside, Rel worked by the dim light of a glow rod, examining the broken saber. He needed an energy cell, a new activation matrix, focusing lens components, perhaps even a replacement emitter shroud if the original proved too damaged. The storm raged for 3 cycles, a symphony of shrieking wind and crackling energy that turned the ruins into a phantasmagorical landscape. When it finally abated, leaving the air tasting of ozone and wet rust, Rel ventured out. The landscape was subtly altered, new pathways carved by the storm, old ones buried. It was during one of these scavenging expeditions, picking through the wreckage of a downed atmospheric skiff, that he first encountered them. They moved with the practiced silence of creatures accustomed to Dagan Vale's treachery. One was a hulking figure, a limping silhouette against the ochre sky. Bryke, as Rel would later learn. His face was a roadmap of old scars, one leg dragging slightly, a relic of some forgotten conflict. He carried a heavy, custom-modified blaster rifle that looked as weathered and dangerous as he did. The other was a girl, Nessa, barely older than Rel himself, her eyes wide and haunted, but with a core of hardened resilience. She clutched a rusty vibro knife as if it were an extension of her own arm, her movements quick and wary. She was thin, her clothes patched and worn, but she moved with a desperate energy. Rel froze, his hand instinctively going to the broken saber hilt tucked into his belt. He was no match for them, not in his current state. Brake's voice, when it came, was a low rumble, like stones grinding together. "Well now, what have we here? A fresh rat for the scrap heap or something more?" His one good eye narrowed, assessing Rel with a disconcerting intensity. Nessa said nothing, her gaze flicking from Rel to the surrounding rubble, constantly evaluating threats. "Just looking for supplies," Rel managed, his voice hoarse. "Supplies are scarce," Brake stated, his blaster never wavering. "What have you got to trade, boy?" Rel hesitated. He had little of value, save for the Jedi artifacts he carried, and revealing those was unthinkable. He offered a handful of ration packs and a water purification unit. An uneasy truce was struck. They traded some of his rations for a battered hydro-spanner and a small power coil Brake had salvaged. The ex-mercenary, despite his gruff exterior, seemed to possess a shrewd eye for value, not just in objects, but in people. He watched Rel with an unnerving focus, as if weighing his potential. Nessa, on the other hand, kept her distance. Her eyes, Rel noticed, kept flicking to the strange, cylindrical object at his belt. She didn't see a broken tool. She sensed something else, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck prickle. "He's not normal," she'd whispered to Brake later, when she thought Rel couldn't hear, her voice tight with a primal distrust that transcended mere suspicion. She was right, of course, though not in the way she imagined. He was a dying ember, and the universe was a storm. The uneasy alliance with the scavengers, Brake and Nessa, settled into a tense routine. Days were spent picking through the corpse of the Enclave and the wider, storm-scoured ruins of Doggan Vale's forgotten colonial past. Nights were huddled in makeshift shelters, the silence punctuated by the howl of the perpetual gales and the unspoken anxieties that hung heavy in the thin air. Rel focused on his primary task, rebuilding his master's lightsaber. The power coil Brake had traded him was a start, but it was crude, designed for industrial tools, not the precise, energy-hungry heart of a Jedi's weapon. He needed more. He found a focusing crystal, surprisingly intact, within the shattered remnants of a Jedi training remote. It was small, imperfect, but it pulsed with a faint residual resonance when he held it, a tiny whisper in the overwhelming silence of the Force. He salvaged emitter components from a derelict survey droid, its optical array surprisingly robust. The activation stud was the greatest challenge. He eventually fashioned a crude but functional replacement from the trigger mechanism of a discarded holdout blaster. Each piece was a compromise, a testament to his desperation and dwindling resources. It was during one such scavenging run, several clicks from their current camp, near the edge of a vast, wind-eroded canyon, that the sky itself seemed to acquire a malevolent eye. A glint of durasteel, high above, catching the sickly light of Doggan Vale's twin suns as they dipped below the jagged horizon. A patrol. Clones. Even from this distance, their armor, though scuffed and bearing unfamiliar unit markings, was unmistakable. Remnants. Vultures picking over the carcass of the Jedi Order. Commander Loren, a man whose face had become a mask of grim duty, surveyed the desolate landscape through his macro binoculars. His orders were clear. Locate and eliminate any surviving Jedi on Doggan Vale. The Enclave's destruction had been thorough, but whispers persisted. Jedi were like desert weeds, resilient, capable of taking root in the most inhospitable soil. His surveillance droid, a sleek, arachnid-like machine designated X7, hummed softly beside him, its multiple optical sensors sweeping the terrain. Rel's blood ran cold. He, Brake, and Nessa had been tracking a faint energy signature, hoping for a functional power cell, when the patrol appeared. Brake, with a grunt, shoved Nessa towards a cluster of jagged, rust-colored rock formations. "Get down, and stay down." Rel needed no such prompting. He scrambled for cover, pressing himself against the cold stone, his heart hammering against his ribs. He tried to use the Force, to cloak his presence as Master On had begun to teach him, but the silence within him was a suffocating blanket. He could only rely on the natural camouflage of his drab clothing and the broken, uneven terrain. His fear, however, was a palpable thing. a raw, untamed energy coiling in his gut. He could feel it, a prickling heat, a desperate tremor. X7's sensors, designed to pick up the faintest energy fluctuations, registered the anomaly. Not a weapon discharge, not a standard energy signature, but something else. A flare of concentrated bioelectric energy, localized, intense, and distinctly unusual. The droid's internal processors cross-reference the signature with its database of known force abilities. Probability, Jedi presence, untrained, uncontrolled. It transmitted its findings to Commander Loran. Target acquired, Loran muttered, his voice devoid of emotion. Sector Gamma 7. Possible force sensitive. Deploy ground units. Rel didn't hear the command, but he felt the shift in the atmosphere, the subtle change in the patrol's posture. They knew. Somehow they knew. Panic, sharp and cold, threatened to overwhelm him. He had to move, to create a diversion. Anything. His gaze fell on a loose pile of shale and scree perched precariously on the canyon edge above the clone patrol's advance path. An idea, desperate and reckless, formed in his mind. He closed his eyes, not reaching for the absent force, but for the raw, churning fear within him. He focused it, channeled it, not with the calm precision of a Jedi, but with the desperate fury of a cornered animal. He visualized the shale, the instability, the downward path. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint tremor. A single pebble dislodged, then another. The fear within him surged, a wild, uncontrolled torrent, and the shale moved. Not a gentle slide, but a sudden, violent cascade, a miniature avalanche of rock and dust that roared down the canyon slope. It wasn't enough to stop the clones, but it was enough to startle them, to break their advance for a precious few moments. Enough time for Brake to lay down suppressing fire, for Nessa to create a smoke screen with a salvaged emergency flare, for Rel to melt back into the shadows of the deeper ravine. They had escaped, but the encounter left Rel shaken. That flare of power. It had been his, yet not his. Raw, untamed, born of fear, frightening. Back in the relative safety of their hidden camp, a hollowed-out cavern beneath a massive, wind-sculpted rock formation, Rel worked with feverish intensity on the lightsaber. The encounter with the clones had stripped away his last vestiges of hesitation. He needed a weapon, not for attack, not for revenge, but for survival. He assembled the scavenged components, his hands surprisingly steady, despite the tremor that still lingered in his limbs. The industrial power coil hummed erratically when connected to the activation matrix. The focusing crystal, when seated in its makeshift housing, seemed to resist, to fight against the crude technology surrounding it. He ignored the warning signs, driven by a desperate urgency. Finally, it was done. The hilt was a Frankensteinian assembly of mismatched parts, held together with fused wiring and hope. It felt wrong in his hand, unbalanced, a crude imitation of his master's elegant weapon. He took a deep breath, and with a surge of trepidation, thumbed the activation stud. The lightsaber ignited with a jarring, discordant shriek, a sound utterly alien to the smooth, resonant hum he remembered. The blade was a sickly, flickering yellow-green, spitting sparks and fluctuating in length, its energy field visibly unstable. It was a weapon forged in silence and desperation, a perfect metaphor for his own inner turbulence. He tried a simple training maneuver, a basic parry. The unstable blade bucked in his grip, its energy arcing wildly. He felt a searing pain in his forearm as the blade's corona brushed against his sleeve, instantly vaporizing the fabric and scorching his skin. He cried out, dropping the weapon as if it were a venomous serpent. It clattered to the cavern floor, the erratic blade carving a smoking gouge in the stone before sputtering out with a final mournful hiss. He stared at the crude weapon, then at his burned arm, a fresh wave of despair washing over him. He could build it, but could he wield it? And at what cost? The burn on Rel's forearm was a constant throbbing reminder of his inadequacy. The crude lightsaber lay inert in his pack, a source of both desperate hope and profound fear. Days turned into weeks. The trio, Rel, Brake, and Nessa, continued their precarious existence, their scavenging radius expanding out of necessity. The ruins of the Jedi Enclave had yielded all they were likely to give. They needed more, and more lay beyond the familiar desolation in the wider, unknown wastes of Dogan Vale. It was Brake who suggested venturing towards Valkyra, the only significant settlement on Dogan Vale. A sprawling, low-slung city nestled in the relative shelter of a massive crater basin. Used to be a decent stopover, the ex-mercenary grumbled, massaging his bad leg. Might be pickings there the storm rats and the imps haven't chewed over yet. Rel was hesitant. A city meant people, and people meant clones, Imperials. But their supplies were dwindling, and the gnawing emptiness of the Force was eroding his spirit. Perhaps, he thought, some contact with a larger community, however fraught with danger, might offer something. A spark, a whisper. The journey to Valkyra was an ordeal. Dogan Vale's storms were relentless, its terrain treacherous. They traveled under the cover of the planet's perpetual twilight, navigating by the faint glow of its twin moons and Brake's surprisingly accurate, if archaic, navigational tools. Nessa, agile and possessing an almost preternatural ability to sense danger, scouted ahead. Rel, his senses dulled by the Force's silence, felt like a burden. His guilt over Master On's sacrifice, his grief, his fear, they were a constant, leaden weight. As they neared Valkyra, the signs of Imperial occupation became undeniable. Wreckage of civilian speeders, hastily constructed checkpoints manned by grim-faced clone troopers, and the ubiquitous presence of surveillance droids, their single red eyes glowing malevolently in the gloom. The city itself, when they finally crested the crater rim and looked down upon it, was a grim tableau. What might once have been a vibrant, if rugged frontier town, was now shrouded in an atmosphere of fear and oppression. Imperial banners, stark and black, hung limply from public buildings. The streets were patrolled, curfews enforced. They learned, through hushed whispers from other scavengers and fringe dwellers they encountered on the outskirts, of Moff Kirin volume. An Imperial governor dispatched to Dogan Vale to restore order after the Jedi Purge, Vol ruled Valkyra with an iron fist encased in a velvet glove of chillingly efficient bureaucracy. Surveillance was his watchword, fear his currency. Every citizen was a potential dissident, every shadow a hiding place for rebellion. The clones were his enforcers, their loyalty absolute, their methods brutal. Rel's guilt and grief intensified. This was the galaxy his master had died to protect, a galaxy where fear was the only law and hope a forgotten word. He tried to meditate, as Master On had taught him, to find some solace, some clarity in the Force. But the silence persisted, and instead of peace, his meditations were haunted by visions of his master's death. He saw the flash of crimson blades, felt the crushing weight of the collapsing temple, heard Master On's final, choked cry. He would awaken from these visions trembling, his heart pounding, the taste of ash in his mouth. It was Nessa who finally broke through his despair, though not in the way he expected. Her younger brother, Kale, had fallen ill. A fever, a racking cough, common ailments on Dagan Vale, but deadly without proper medical attention. The only place to get medicine was within Velkira, in the Imperial Quarantine Zone, a place from which few returned unchanged, if they returned at all. "Please, Rel," Nessa begged. Her usual hardened exterior cracked, revealing the desperate fear beneath. "They say you Jedi. You have powers. You can help him." Rel recoiled as if struck. "I am not a Jedi," he said, the words tasting like poison on his tongue. "Not anymore. The Force is silent to me. I have no powers." He saw the hope die in Nessa's eyes, replaced by a weary resignation that cut him deeper than any physical blow. Brake, ever the pragmatist, offered a different solution. "There's a smuggler contact I know in the lower sectors. Might be able to get some meds for a price." The price, Rel knew, would be steep. All they had scavenged, perhaps more. The exchange was to happen near a derelict atmospheric processing plant on the edge of the quarantine zone. It was a trap. Clone troopers, alerted by an informant, swarmed the meeting point. Brake, seeing Nessa and the ailing Kyle, whom Nessa had insisted on bringing, wrapped in thermal blankets, about to be captured, did the unthinkable. He roared a challenge, his heavy blaster spitting defiance, drawing the clones' attention. "Run, you fools! Get the boy out!" He bought them precious seconds, his limping form a surprisingly formidable obstacle, before a concentrated volley of blaster fire cut him down. Nessa screamed, a raw animal sound of pure anguish. She tried to go back, but Rel grabbed her, pulling her and the feverish Kale towards the relative cover of the ruined plant. Clones were closing in. There was no escape. Something inside Rel snapped. The fear, the grief, the guilt, the crushing weight of the Force's silence, it all coalesced into a single white-hot point of rage. He fumbled for the crude lightsaber in his pack, his hand closing around the makeshift hilt. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He acted. He thumbed the activation stud. The unstable blade shrieked to life, its sickly yellow-green light casting grotesque shadows on the rusted machinery. He charged the nearest checkpoint, a whirlwind of desperate, untrained fury. His movements were clumsy, raw, lacking any of the elegance or precision of a Jedi. He swung the erratic blade not with skill, but with a brutal, terrifying force. Blaster bolts sizzled past him, some deflected by sheer dumb luck as the unstable energy field of his saber flared erratically. He was a force of nature, a storm of grief unleashed. He didn't fight like a Jedi. He fought like a cornered animal, teeth bared, driven by a primal need to protect. He saw a clone trooper raise a blaster, and with a guttural roar, he brought the crackling blade down. There was a sickening sizzle, the smell of ozone and something else, something that made his stomach churn. The clones, momentarily stunned by the sheer ferocity of the attack, by the appearance of a forbidden weapon, faltered. It was enough. Rel, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the adrenaline coursing through him, leaving him shaking and nauseous, grabbed Nessa and Kyle. They plunged into the labyrinthine depths of the ruined plant, the sounds of blaster fire and confused shouts fading behind them. Later, hidden in a forgotten maintenance tunnel, the adrenaline wore off, leaving Rel trembling and horrified. He looked at the lightsaber, now deactivated, its hilt still warm in his hand. He had fought. He had killed. The realization was a cold stone in his stomach. He could fight, yes, but the raw, brutal power he had unleashed, the fear he had seen in the clone's eyes, the sickening finality of his blows, it frightened him more than any Imperial threat. He could fight, but at what cost to his soul? The silence of the Force suddenly felt less like an absence and more like a judgment. The aftermath of the skirmish at the quarantine zone checkpoint left a bitter taste in Rel's mouth. Bryke was gone, a casualty of a fight that wasn't his. Kyle, Nessa's brother, was still desperately ill. The medicine they'd risked so much for now an impossible dream. And Rel was a killer. The crude lightsaber, once a symbol of desperate hope, now felt like a brand, searing his conscience with the memory of his brutal, uncontrolled rage. He'd hidden it deep within his pack, unable to bear the sight of it. Nessa, though grieving for Bryke, was pragmatic. Kyle needed help, and their current hiding place in the derelict atmospheric plant wouldn't remain safe for long. Imperial patrols would be scouring the area. The old temple ruins, she said, her voice flat, devoid of its usual spark. Bryke always said there were deeper levels, places the imps wouldn't bother to search. Maybe there's something there. Old Jedi med supplies, anything. It was a slim hope, but it was all they had. They journeyed back to the shattered enclave, a grim pilgrimage. The ruins seemed even more desolate now, haunted by fresh ghosts. Rel, guided by a half-forgotten memory of Master On mentioning hidden archives, led them to a section of the temple that had partially collapsed into the subterranean caverns that riddled Dagan Vale. After hours of shifting rubble, his injured shoulder protesting with every movement, they found it. A narrow, almost invisible fissure leading down into the darkness. The air within was cool and still, a stark contrast to the storm-lashed surface. By the faint light of a glow rod, they navigated a series of crumbling passageways, their footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. It was in a small circular chamber, its walls lined with empty niches, that Rel found it. Not a cache of medpacks, but a single unassuming object tucked away in a hidden alcove, shielded from the initial bombing by a thick slab of fallen durasteel. A Jedi holocron. It was Master On's. Rel recognized the intricate carvings on its crystalline surface, the unique energy signature that even the silent Force couldn't entirely mask. His hands trembled as he picked it up. It felt cool to the touch, yet pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible warmth. With a deep breath, he focused his will, a technique Master On had taught him for accessing such devices. The holocron hummed to life, casting a soft blue glow that illuminated the small chamber. And then, his master's image flickered into existence, not the vibrant, living man Rel remembered, but a translucent, ethereal echo. Rel, my Padawan, the image of Kavar On began, his voice tinged with a sorrow that transcended time and space. If you are seeing this, then the worst has come to pass. The order is shattered, and darkness has fallen upon the galaxy. The message was brief, recorded in the final desperate moments before the attack. Master On spoke of the betrayal, of the sudden brutal efficiency of Order 66. He spoke of his fears for the future, for the countless younglings and Padawans scattered and hunted. But then, his tone shifted, a familiar calm settling over his spectral features. Do not let despair consume you, Rel. The Force is not a weapon to be wielded in anger, nor a shield to hide behind in fear. It is the current that connects all life, the breath of the galaxy itself. Power, my Padawan, is a seductive illusion. The Sith seek to dominate through strength, to control through fear. But the true strength of a Jedi, the strength that endures, lies not in power, but in mercy, in compassion, in the courage to choose light when surrounded by darkness. The image flickered, the blue light dimming. The Jedi Order may fall, Rel, but the ideals of the Jedi, justice, compassion, service, these must not be allowed to die. They must be reinterpreted, renewed, not in grand temples, but in the hearts of those who dare to hope. Rebuild your saber, young one, but more importantly, rebuild your spirit. Find your own path. The Force will guide you, even if its voice is now a whisper. Remember, Rel, mercy. The image faded, leaving Rel in the dim glow of the holocron, tears streaming down his face. Mercy. In the face of such overwhelming brutality, such profound loss, the concept seemed almost laughably naive. Yet, coming from Master On, from the very heart of the Jedi tradition he had thought lost, the word resonated with an unexpected power. He looked at his hands, the hands that had wielded the crude lightsaber in such a savage fury. He thought of the fear in the clone trooper's eyes before the fatal blow. He thought of Bryke's sacrifice, of Kael's innocent suffering. Master On's final lesson was not a condemnation, but a challenge, a path forward. He spent the next few days in the hidden chamber, Nessa tending to Kael in a nearby alcove. Using the few tools he had, and the residual energy of the holocron to guide his focus, Rel began to rebuild his lightsaber, properly this time. He carefully disassembled the crude weapon, cleaning each component, meditating on its purpose, on its connection to the Force, even in its silence. He realigned the focusing crystal, not forcing it, but gently coaxing it into harmony with the other components. He rewired the activation matrix, his touch now precise, his intent clear. He even managed to repair the cracked emitter shroud, using a tiny fusion welder he'd salvaged, the heat surprisingly manageable under his newfound concentration. As he worked, he meditated, not on the horrifying visions of his master's death, but on his master's words, mercy, compassion. He didn't try to reach out to the silent Force. Instead, he listened to the silence within himself, acknowledging his fear, his grief, his anger, but no longer consumed by them. He was beginning to understand. The Force wasn't a tap to be turned on or off. It was the water itself, the riverbed, the ocean. Even in its silence, it was present. When the lightsaber was finally complete, it felt different in his hand, balanced, whole. He thumbed the activation stud. This time, there was no shriek, no erratic sputtering. A smooth, pure emerald green blade sprang to life, its hum a steady, reassuring thrum. It was his master's color. It was his saber. It was Nessa who brought the news, her voice urgent. Rel, patrols are sweeping the ruins, more than usual, and I overheard Moth volume. He's planning to level what's left of the temple. Says it's a blight, a potential martyr site. He's bringing in heavy demolition charges. Rel looked at the newly rebuilt lightsaber in his hand. He thought of the scavengers, the fringe dwellers who eked out a meager existence in the ruins, who would be caught in the destruction. He thought of Master On's final resting place, about to be obliterated. He faced a choice, the first true choice of his new path. Warn the scavengers and flee, as any sensible survivor would do, or stay, act. He remembered his master's words. The courage to choose light when surrounded by darkness. He looked at Nessa, at the sleeping Kael. whose fever, Rel noticed with a faint stirring of something that might have been the Force, seemed to have lessened slightly. Moff Vol wants to erase the past, Rel said, his voice surprisingly steady. But some things deserve to be remembered. Some things are worth fighting for. He clipped the lightsaber to his belt. He would act, not out of revenge for his master, not out of anger, but out of a conviction that was slowly, painfully, taking root in the ashes of his old life. The fire below was stirring.